what they look like. So I thought you might like to see what Michael Hoy looks like today. So here I am out in the garden of my house in Banbury, and you will remember that I mentioned Alistair about entries in my diary for 1947, a very posh diary which I was given for Christmas at the end of 1946, and that prompted me to make very good use of it, and I'm now very grateful for the gift because it brings back all sorts of memories. So I've just selected a few of the entries which refer to your family and your mother in particular, and the first one is for Wednesday the 15th of January, and it refers to Monty. Monty, you might or might not remember, was a mongrel dog which my father had bought and hadn't really trained very well. It used to get off on various escapades, and on this particular day Monty followed the Mackenzie twins to Seaton Junction this morning and was almost run over by an express train there. Well, I don't know whether that could happen these days down at Seaton Junction. But the next day there's a reference to another sort of transport, because I imagine you used to cycle down and catch the train there, whereas I cycled the whole way to school. So on the next day it says the head announced that he had received a letter about the Dalwood bus to take us Dalwood and Shoot pupils to school instead of cycling. We had feared the idea had been filed away to be forgotten. Well, of course we did eventually have the bus, and actually I was a little reluctant to go on it because I enjoyed my cycle trips. Just over 5 miles it was to school, but I had to go on the bus because I was a prefect. Then on the 26th of January, which was a Sunday, it says that there weren't many people who went to evensong. Only the two Mackenzie twins were in the choir, but we were all there, including Granny. That was my mother's mother, who stayed for us for a time in Dalwood. And then it says Mrs. Mack came round at 9:30 p.m. The next entry I've noted was for the 16th of March. Mrs. Mackenzie came round in the evening and we all played cards, nines, rummy and boilers. Drinks all round, it says. I had vermouth, preceded by supper. Got to bed at 10:55 p.m. So everybody enjoyed that evening by the sound of it. Then on the 4th of April, a Friday, in fact it was Good Friday, so it was a holiday weekend, and it says Dad and Granny left for London in the car at 9:05. Granny to stay at and Dad for a short visit to Auntie Emily's. That was an aunt of mine who lived in Enfield. They took Mrs. Mackenzie to Winchester, where they met Mr. and Mrs. Page and Willer, who were staying at Mrs. Smith's here in Dalwood. They arrived in the early evening. So it was all a little bit complicated, but you might possibly know why your mother would have been going to Winchester on that Good Friday. Then nothing really of great significance, I think, until the 3rd of August. When it says that Mrs. Mackenzie came with her mother to look at the den. The den was a small room in the house which had been redecorated and refurbished, and I suppose really my parents were wanting to show it off a little bit. So your mother came round, and it says, and also to show her and Mrs. Stead the house. Oh well, I suppose your mother knew the house, but her mother, to her it was all new. They stayed about a quarter of an hour. Then the next day, Mrs. Mackenzie and young Charles Mackenzie went with us today to Charmouth. And then there's a whole lot about what we did in Charmouth, including looking, not surprisingly, for fossils. Then on to the 24th of August. Again, we went to Seaton today and took Charles Mackenzie with us. It was the second time I had been there and the first time for the others, which is a little bit surprising that Mum and Dad and my sister had not previously been to Seaton. We had our lunch there and so on and so forth. Then through to the 23rd of October. What happened on the 23rd of October, I wonder? Ah yes, well there's a reference here to a play at school which I think would have been Quality Street, and I had a small part in it, and evidently they had a raffle in order to raise funds for this production. And it says the raffle for the play was drawn in the afternoon. Mrs. Mackenzie won the duck. Well, I hope it wasn't a rubber duck, and I hope it wasn't a live duck, and I hope she enjoyed it. And last but not least, on Boxing Day, begins by saying we got up later than we have done for some time and had breakfast, and so on and so forth. In the evening we entertained Mrs. Ian, Bim and Charles Mackenzie to a party. They also came to tea. We played games like telegrams, and the party broke up at a fairly reasonable hour. Well, I think I've always not really particularly enjoyed staying up late, so I was very happy that it all ended at what I called a reasonable hour. So that was my 1947 diary, and as I say, it's a mine of information really, and I've given some extracts from it to Alison Morgan in Dalwood to help her with her researches and building up the profile of the village. I've also got another diary here which is actually for 1940, and that again is something quite different. That was when we were living up in Manchester during the war. I think everything that I'm sending is fairly explanatory. I did find out, Alistair, from you in our telephone conversation that you had worked for Siemens, but you didn't ask me what I had done. I went to Reading University thanks very largely to the persistence of the head teacher, Donald Mackay-Owen, so I owed him really quite a debt of gratitude for that. And then after getting a rather moderate degree, I did my national service in the RAF, and I worked for a few years for another electronics firm, actually, for Mullards, down in Surrey. But that was when really transistors were only beginning to have a wide usage in equipment. And it was while I was there really that things sort of conspired to make me think in terms of being ordained into the Church of England. And eventually I went and trained at a theological college and was ordained. And so I've spent most of my life after that in various parishes up and down the country. Finally, as we said, retiring here at Banbury in 1996. So that's a little bit about me, and you've got a little glimpse here of the garden at the back of our semi-detached house. It's not a very big garden, but when we came, it was certainly in my mind that whilst it would be very nice to have a large garden and grow lots of vegetables, the time would come fairly quickly when I really wouldn't want to do all that sort of work. So we're very happy to have this. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the material I'm sending to you. This, the video of the reunion at Val Watkins, and then after that, as a separate item, a little look round Dalwood, which I did on another visit during the holiday we had last summer.